Hey, this is a video showing my Game Boy Advance collection, and if you want to see my other collection videos, I've done Game Boy and Game Boy Color as well, so, check those out if you like this video. And I'm going to try to make this a little more efficient, so if I have a box for a game, I won't show the cartridge because it takes a while to synchronize that stuff, and it's really kind of padded out my videos in length, so, yeah, still trying to learn how to do these as effectively as possible, but first I'll just kind of show you guys what I used to play Game Boy Advance games. I kind of went over this in my original Game Boy video, but it seems appropriate since these are Game Boy Advances and showing my Game Boy Advance collection. So this right here is my Game Boy Advance SP AGS 101 model, which means it's front lit, it has a really nice screen, everything is really crisp. That's probably what anyone who likes Game Boy Advance games should get. Now, if you have a DS Lite and you swear by that, that's fine with me, but I prefer not to use that just because the A and B buttons are switched on that, so unless you're playing like a really slow-paced RPG, it does affect gameplay for action games and stuff like that. I don't like how the buttons are reversed. This is the original SP model, which I originally got when it came out, and this is one of the cooler things I own. This is the Famicom Game Boy Micro, which cool. It's cool in its own right, but a lot of the games show up really small. It's it's good for certain games, but not all of them, especially ones with text. Now, just to kind of showcase, how effective the AGS 101 model is. Here I have a Pokemon Fire Red, and in the original SP I have Pokemon Leaf Green. So you can see this is really, kind of dim in comparison to the AGS 101 model. It's even more, the contrast is even greater in person. So yeah, here it is right there. Right here, it's really clear. You can really tell how great the sprites are in these Game Boy Advance Pokemon games. Probably some of the best sprites in the series. I even like them more than the DS ones, since they're kind of pixelated and blurry in the DS ones, unfortunately. You can also make it a little brighter, which is nice. So yeah, that's why I use this model, and it only came in 3 colors. This is the light blue model. They also had a pink one and kind of a dark gray, blackish one. So make sure it's the AGS 101 model if you want it. And just for show, this is this is a pretty nice screen as well, really bright. But like I said, it's just kind of small, This is Namco Museum. I don't know why I was playing that here. But yeah, let's get on to the games. Now that we've kind of showcased the consoles. So first we'll go over the Mario series. Here's Super Mario Advance. Now this was a launch game for the Game Boy Advance, and it's just a remake of Super Mario Bros. 2 USA, which is kind of one of the odder games in the series since it was originally Doki Doki Panic in Japan. I'm sure you already know the story about that, but it was made by the Mario team, so it's not like it was that crazy. So, but anyway, yeah, this is kind of based off of the Super Mario All-Stars remake, and they added voices, which are kind of annoying. I'd recommend playing with the volume off in most cases, since you can't toggle off the voices. And it comes with, as all the Mario Advance games do, this includes the Mario Brothers arcade game, which is nice. And this game has really grown on me over the years. Kind of when I first played, I didn't really like it that much, since it's not anything like the other Mario games, but it's a really great game in its own right. And yeah, definitely recommend this one. Next up is Super Mario Advance 2, Super Mario World. Now, I have the box somewhere, but I don't know where it is. It's kind of annoying me at the moment that I can't find it, but yeah, this is a remake of the Super Nintendo launch game, Super Mario World. There's an ongoing debate on whether this is better than Super Mario 3. I've gone gone back and forth over the years, but I'll say I like Super Mario 3 more just because I like the enemy designs more, I like the level designs more. It's more fun to replay, and the map screen is simple enough where you don't have to keep backtracking. Um, Stuff like that. That's why I like it more. But anyway, with this game, it's a pretty faithful port, except for the music, which is not nearly as good. Unfortunately, the sound on the Game Boy Advance was not nearly as good as the Super Nintendo sound chip, so this game in particular took a big hit in that regard, so I put the volume off, but other than that, it's a really great game. Uh, would highly recommend this as well. And next up is Super Mario Advance 3 Yoshi's Island. Now, obviously, this is a remake of Yoshi's Island, the Super Nintendo. It's funny that they don't call it Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island on this, which they did in North America for the Super Nintendo game. It's just, to kind of get more people to buy it. But obviously, Yoshi's Island is a great game as well. It's on par. I don't put it in the mainline Mario series just because I think this is more of a Yoshi game. But this is as good as a mainline Mario game. Really great art style. Great level designs. Really cool large bosses. There's a really nice boss somewhere where you're fighting on the moon, and you can go 360 degrees against a crow. It's really visually impressive. As for this particular port, I think the graphics are 95% as good as that Super Nintendo one version. It's not quite as good. The sound is okay. I'd say it's better than Super Mario World Advanced. That conversion. I think this is a better audio conversion. And there's extra content, but I never really reached it because you have to get perfect scores on everything, and it's not something I've ever done just because it's kind of difficult in some areas. So, but yeah, overall a great game. And the final Super Mario Advance game, Super Mario Advance 4, Super Mario Bros. 3. Now, obviously, this is a legendary game, one of the best-selling games of all time, non-bundled, of course. It's actually probably the best-selling game until, GTA San Andreas, I believe. But, yeah, this is a great remake. It's based on the All-Stars version, which, in my opinion, holds up way better than the NES version. I played both back-to-back, and I don't know, Super Mario Bros. 3 doesn't look as good as you remember it on the NES, and it looks really good on the GBA or the Super Nintendo. You've probably already played this, so there isn't that much to say, but I guess I'll talk about the e-reader option, which adds new levels, brand new levels that weren't there before. It adds vegetables from Super Mario Bros. 2. It adds the cape from Super Mario World. So they're kind of hard to find these days, and there's some really annoying Walmart exclusive cards where you had to buy. I think you had to buy the Game Boy Advance bundle to get exclusive Super Mario Bros. 3 cards at the time, which I don't have. I have all the other cards, and they're also hard to work with on the e-reader since they wouldn't read them properly or something. I don't know. The e-reader was a really hard to use machine. But if you get it to work, it should be the definitive version of Super Mario Bros. 3, which is really cool. I hope they somehow add a complete version with all the e-reader content on Virtual Console or something. And next up is Mario Tennis Power Tour. This is kind of a sequel to the Game Boy Color Mario Tennis game. It has the power shots from the GameCube version, which I personally like a lot. It has the RPG mode that the Game Boy Color one had, which is you kind of start out as a rookie tennis player, and as you face more opponents, you level up your character, and you can focus on certain stuff like how good your lob shot is or your speed or stuff like that, which is really cool. But the gameplay isn't as good as the GameCube version, so I'm kind of hoping that one day they make a game that has the RPG elements of the handheld games, but the gameplay of the console versions, because there's always seems to be a compromise, and the gameplay is okay in the Game Boy Advance version, but could be better. Still a good game though. And here's its brother, Mario Golf Advanced Tour. Pretty much, I echo the same comments. Mario Golf Toadstool Tour for GameCube is incredible. It doesn't have the RPG mode, unfortunately, which, like I said, kind of compromises everything. I wish they made a Mario Golf game with both elements. And yeah, another good game, but not nearly as good as Toadstool Tour on GameCube. And next up is Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. Now this is kind of like the portable spiritual successor to the Paper Mario series, which is kind of a spiritual sequel to the Super Mario RPG game on Super Nintendo. This plays a lot like Super Mario RPG, which is a really good thing in my opinion. It has really good dialogue, very humorous. I like how Luigi's basically like plays second fiddle to Mario, and they play a lot of jokes on that. It has like that same engaging active battle system where if you time your button press correctly, you'll do more damage, which, you know, when you add more interactivity to a kind of slow-paced, turn-based RPG, I really appreciate it. That's why I can't get into some RPGs, which we'll get into in a bit, actually. So yeah, great game. And probably the best in the series, unfortunately. Next up is Mario Kart Super Circuit. And at the time, I really loved this game just because, you know, one thing I should say is that the Game Boy Advance was kind of the beginning of the end of, like, ghetto handheld gaming. With Game Boy and Game Boy Color, you never knew what you were going to get. And, you know, a lot of the games are really crappy ports of console games. Not ports, but, like, you know, iterations. You know, like you get an inferior Mega Man game compared to the console brother and, you know, stuff like that. So that's why I was really excited to play games like these. But this plays a lot like the Super Nintendo version. Like, for example, it has coins. It even has every single track from the Super Nintendo version, which is like the best part of this game. It's like one thing you can take away from this. Like, if you feel like playing the Super Nintendo tracks on the go, this is the one to get. It has a few cool, unique tracks. Like, there's a track where you're on the clouds and I guess I do that a lot these days, but back then it was kind of original. But yeah, overall, pretty good game. It did introduce this stupid thing, the grading system, where it grades you on how well you've raced. I've never been able to get like perfect scores on that, which is why I haven't been able to unlock characters in like Mario Kart Wii, which really pisses me off. So I'm glad they got rid of that in the 3DS version. And last of the Mario games, Mario vs. Donkey Kong. Now this was like a spiritual successor to Donkey Kong 94 on the Game Boy. You basically start out at the bottom of a level. You try to rescue Princess Peach from Donkey Kong. You know, you have to get a key to get to the door. Kind of a puzzle platformer in that regard, and not quite as good as Donkey Kong 94, but a good game in its own right. And now that we're done with Mario, let's move on to Zelda. Now, there's only one unique original Zelda game, which is Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap. This was the last game that was co-developed by Capcom, their flagship, I believe it's Flagship Studios, the developer, and Nintendo. Fortunately, this wasn't nearly as good as the Oracle games, which they also worked on. It's kind of just like a bland, like the beginning of really like generically created Zelda games where, you know, usually a Zelda game really makes you feel like you're in this epic, you know, big world where, you know, the world is at stake and, you know, you're this humble hero. But these games are just so, this and the DS Zelda games are just so unspectacular. But one of the interesting aspects is, back when it came out, it was the very first Zelda game in the quote-unquote timeline. It even shows the origins of Link's hat, for crying out loud, which is why it annoyed me that Skyward Sword then took its place as the first game in the timeline, which doesn't make any sense when you think about the hat stuff. But, yeah, just kind of an unspectacular game. It's, you know, fun if you like the Zelda formula, but it doesn't leave you, you know, Like, for example, the Ocarina of Time ending, you knew when you got to that ending, like, wow, this is an incredible game. You know, it's something I'll never forget, but with this game, it's not. You don't get that feeling at all, which is, a shame. And now to get to the remake portions. This is the classic NES original Legend of Zelda. It's just the first Zelda on the Game Boy Advance. This might be hard for a lot of people to go back to since there's not any hand-holding. You got to find everything yourself, basically, and it's interesting game design. There's nothing really like it anymore, so if you want to see where the series began, get this game. And I also have its sequel, Classic NES series Zelda 2. This isn't really anything like any of the other Zelda games. It's kind of this side-scrolling RPG game. It's really hard, and I never really got into it just because I haven't devoted enough time to it. I intend to one day. I hear it's really great if you get into it, but yeah, this is kind of the black sheep of the series, which is interesting. A lot of Nintendo sequels were kind of black sheeps, like Mario 2, like I alluded to earlier. And finally, here's Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. This is just a remake of the Super Nintendo game. They added voices, like when you roll, or when you swing your sword, it sounds like the Link from Ocarina of Time. And the model, Link's model, is different. Kind of looks like the Wind Waker one a tiny bit. They also have this Four Swords multiplayer aspect, which it's hard for most people to do these things. Like, how many people do you know that have Zelda, this particular Zelda remake, and the Link cable, and maybe if you're like 8 years old and you have this and you tell your friends to get it, it's easier. But if you're a little older, it's like impossible. So haven't been able to play it. I heard it's really fun though. They do have a version of this on the 3DS that was free. I think you have to pay for it now, but yeah, something to think about. And now that we're done with Zelda, we can move on to one of the premier Nintendo handheld franchises. I'll just review them together. I have Pokemon Ruby and then Pokemon Emerald. Now this is the third generation of Pokemon games. The first generation was Red, Blue, and Yellow. Second generation was Gold, Silver, Crystal. And the third generation is Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald. And this is a really underrated generation, in my opinion. It cut back a lot of the stupid stuff from Gold and Silver, like the day-night cycle, in my opinion. That's a feature I never liked. And it introduced 2-on-2 battling, which isn't that popular outside of Japan, but it does bring a lot of interesting mechanics to the game. Especially if you like the hardcore battling, simulator stuff, which I do. And the sprites I showed you earlier, kind of the third generation of sprites, they're really clean. They look better than the DS versions, because you always get the sense that with Diamond and Pearl, the DS couldn't really handle the games properly. They look really pixelated. It just doesn't look that good. But they look great on the Game Boy Advance, these games. And I consider these the first modern Pokemon games, because the sprites are a lot cleaner. You know how the Pokemon should look. They introduced the nature system, which I guess more of the casual Pokemon players don't know about, but each Pokemon, when you catch a Pokemon, it has a nature assigned to it. And for example, if I caught a Pikachu and it has a timid nature, it has 10% more speed than the average Pikachu, and also 10% less attack strength than the average Pikachu. And since Pikachu doesn't really use physical attacks in this generation, that's a good thing. So you want more speed, you don't need attack, so it's kind of cool to have a timid-natured Pikachu. So that adds an element of like battling strategy, and it also has the EV system that I won't get into. Basically, if you fight Pokemon with high speed, then your Pokemon gets more speed attributes. It's kind of complicated. Couldn't explain it on this video, but that adds a lot of strategy to these games. You kind of assign extra points to add to a stat and sacrifice other points, and kind of like, an RTS or something. You can kind of min-max stuff, and as the IV system, which I won't get into, and stuff like that, which is, in my opinion, what made Pokemon battling like really good. It was kind of like a stupid, like, kind of side thing in the first two generations, especially in the first generation where Psychic Pokemon were basically broken and easily the best Pokemon in the game. So, and I also think that the legendary Pokemon in these games are the best. Well, not the best, but they're all really strong, like Rayquaza, which you can see here, really cool design. It has a Groudon, it's not on the cartridge, but it's on the box. And there's Kyogre, the water Pokemon. There's Latios and Latias, which are cool too. Like, the legendary Pokemon in the newer games are pretty bad for the most part. So, but yeah, this is a really underrated generation. I like a lot of the new Pokemon they introduced, and yeah, really great generation of games, and they're probably going to remake it on 3DS, as they did with the first two generations. And speaking of which, here I have Fire Red and Leaf Green. Now, these are the original, or these are remakes of the first generation, and they fixed a lot of the issues that the first generation had, in my opinion. For example, there's this one part in Red and Blue where, to get to the sixth gym city, you have to go to a vending machine on the top of the really big mart in Celadon City and get water to give to a guard. But without like a strategy guide or just like wandering around aimlessly, you'd never guess to do that. They fixed that in this game. It's a little more obvious what you need to do. You need to get tea from this old woman. Just a lot nicer that way. Obviously, the battle system's cleaner. The sprites look a lot better, especially compared to the original green version. I also reviewed that. Just a little plug in another video I made, so go check that out too. And yeah, these are really great games. In my opinion, the best generation. I'd say Gen 3 is the second best generation. And one thing I will say is that about what's cool about collecting Game Boy Advance complete boxed games is that, especially the first party games, they have a lot of stuff in them. Like, they have a ton of manuals, they have a lot of inserts in them. You feel like you're getting a lot. I love collecting like Game Boy Advance and N64 games for that reason. And the final Pokemon game I'll review is Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire. Not much to say, just a pinball game, kind of sequel to the original Pokemon Pinball. You're kind of traversing through the pinball table trying to simultaneously catch Pokemon. There isn't too much to say. You have to collect as many Pokemon as you can. There are two boards, there's a Sapphire board and a Ruby board. And yeah, good game overall. And yeah, it's a pinball game.